Good evening and welcome to the Public Square, a show that explores issues relating to individuals from the public affairs perspective and from the religious liberty perspective. I'm your host, Pastor Paul Goodridge, and I am the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the South Central Conference of Seventh day Adventists. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to encourage you to share this link with somebody, subscribe to us. If you're watching us on YouTube or you're watching us on Facebook, go ahead and subscribe. Share the link with somebody. Send the link with to somebody so that they can join us. We have an exciting, important show that we're going to cover this evening. As you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we have a number of experts who are going to talk to us about the issue of mental health and the kinds of things that we can do to promote our own good mental health and within our families, our church, even our community. So, go ahead and let somebody know. I also want to let you know that we welcome your comments, we welcome your feedback. So, if you have questions that you want to ask of our panelists, please go ahead and do so just by sharing those questions in the chat. Or if you have comments that you want to make in response to something that you hear or something that you would like to hear, go ahead and share those comments in the chat. So that we know that you are here. In fact, just to know that you're here, go ahead and just those of you who care to just go ahead and put in the chat in terms of just a word of welcome and where you're joining us from. We know that we have people who may be joining us from around the world. So just go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining us from and just a word of welcome. All right. So the Public Square is a program that talks about issues affecting individuals and the community. My goal is to inform about issues that directly and indirectly have an impact on everyday life, um, ignite meaningful thought and reflection, inspire my audience to action, and integrate faith principles in how we relate to others. And as I shared earlier, today we're going to talk about the issue of mental health as it relates to the family, the African American community, and the church. And we're also going to talk a little bit more about the prevalence of mental health issues, their causes, the availability of resources, and we're also going to look at possible solutions, treatments, and recommendations. So we have Shamela who's joining us. Welcome. That's the British BWI. I'm assuming that's maybe the British West Indies, but I'm not sure. But welcome. All right, so we're going to introduce our panel right after this. So, my guests today are well acquainted with this topic and are experts in this field. And I'm so happy that they are here joining us. We begin with Dr. Anna DeLee Melvin Chester, but she likes to be called Dr. Ann. She's co-owner and psychotherapist of Tree of Life Counseling and Consulting Services. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist and has been counseling individuals, couples, and families for more than 20 years. She's a passionate believer in marriage and relationships and enjoys working with couples as well as individuals to preserve their relationship. She currently serves as the Division Director of Behavioral Health and Wellness for Metropolitan Nashville and Davidson County Public Health Department. Welcome, Dr. Ann, to the Public Square. All right. We also We also have Dr. Ricardo White. Dr. Ricardo White is the medical director and section chief of psychiatry at the Community Hospital of San Bernardino, which is a Dignity Health hospital. He's also the founder of the Mastermind Institute, which has developed the vital living membership that supports its members in establishing life balance and resilience fortification. Welcome, Dr. White. I love these sound effects.
Mine wasn't quite as loud as hers or long.
Okay, well, we don't want that to affect your self-esteem, Doc. So, so Dr. Choya Wise is a psychotherapist and the director and founder of Aspire Counseling and Consulting Services. He's a licensed clinical social worker who's in private independent practice. While he recognizes that most people don't have the skills to have functional relationships, he believes that we all can learn what is needed to build communication and intimacy in relationships. Welcome, Choya Wise, to the public square.
Thank you.
And then lastly, we have Dr. Christopher Marshall, who serves as the associate pastor for discipleship and counseling at the Riverside Nashville Church of Seventh-day Adventists in Nashville, Tennessee. He's an ordained minister as well as a licensed professional counselor and mental health provider in the state of Tennessee, and is a member of Nashville Psychotherapy Institute. He's recently completed his doctorate in psychology, and so we congratulate you, Dr. Marshall, and we welcome you to the public square. All right, all right. So we have a number of individuals who are also joining us in the chat. Pamela Huggerbrook, welcome, welcome. And we also want to welcome, joining from Barbados. All right, all right. So there's a Bayesian connection there. Maybe you'll hear it from Dr. Marshall once he starts speaking. But listen, I want to try to dive into the program because there's a lot that I want us to cover, and I know that we don't have a lot of time to do it. So first things first, I want to ask each of you from your perspective, based on your background, based on your experience, how would you define mental health? And what does good mental health look like, or what does bad or poor mental health look like? We'll begin with you, Dr. Ann. From your perspective, what is mental health?
Well, I'd say first of all, mental health is defined by the definer. That's the first step. But if you look at it from a clinical perspective, or you look at it from a practice perspective, mental health is defined as disorders that affect your mood, your thinking, and your behavior. Okay, so what are the things that affect your mood, your thinking, and your behavior? And so, good mental health, don't like the word good, so I say a person who is in a healthy place mentally will be able to adjust their thinking, their thoughts, and their moods, no matter what life throws their way or brings their way, or whatever the things they encounter.
Okay, okay. Dr. White, from your perspective, how would you define mental health, and what healthy is and what unhealthy is?
I'm so intrigued by the question, and there's a twinge of discomfort most of us as clinicians experience when you ask about mental health, because the reality is most of our training is directed at disease. So if you said, what are the disorders? We're very comfortable with that. But when you talk about health, that's a whole other thing entirely. And one of my obsessions has been, no, what is health? What does health look like? Mental health is the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's not real. Mental health is the ability to set the boundaries that you need to forge a life that is centered in abundance and thriving. Mental health is the capacity to remember the important things that are going on in your life. to be able to imagine and to have the fortitude to be focused on the things that you need to be focused on, to realize and create the awesome things that impregnate your imagination. So mental health undergirds our ability to thrive. Now
Okay. Okay.
disorders, on the other hand, is the reverse of all of that, and it really
Abs-
deals with the disorders and the many things that we've learned, whether depression, anxiety, bipolar, but it's when that system becomes deranged, when you're not able to function in your life, and your brain is, whether it's depressed, or and so you're down even though there might not be an explanation for you being down, or you have an impaired ability to distinguish between what's real or not real, or when you've been subjected to trauma and subsequently now you have trouble setting the boundaries you need to in order to navigate life effectively. So
Okay.
just so yeah so it's important to understand the physiology so that you can then understand the pathophysiology.
Okay. Okay. Uh, Choya Wise, welcome. And from your perspective, how would you define this area of mental health?
And I share sentiment with Dr. White and what he was expressing because I don't know that often I'm asked this question in this way, and you kind of want to revert back to DSM and things like that. But I do feel that from my perspective, I think mental health is broad. I
Yeah.
think it's like Dr. Ann was saying, it's somewhat subjective, you know.
Mhm.
But to nail it down for me, it's when one really has difficulty because the issues that they have are affecting them as far as their social,
Mhm.
occupational, interpersonal concerns. I mean, to the point to where like I just can't for some reason be comfortable around men, or I can't be comfortable around women, or these are just examples. Like we have these problems that are just kind of impacting the way that we live, that's affecting our peace, our relationships, our sense of safety and well-being. And so I look at mental health from that standpoint. It makes it tough for us as clinicians, especially with the insurance system, because they want us to point a label and a diagnosis, and a lot of times it makes it complicated because some people don't really have a diagnosis, but we might agree that that many of them have mental health concerns. I think
Mhm.
most of us have some mental health concerns because we're all sinners. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of my perspective.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Marshall.
Yeah, these guys are deep, man. They almost covered everything. I'm just going to say, you know, I've got we in this Western society has really separated the mind from the body.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, we assume that mental health is only a mind thing. But the reality is that mental health encompasses the whole person holistically. And if you were to ask me for one word that would kind of define someone who is on the positive end of mental health, I would say that that person would be resilient. That person would be a
Mhm.
person who is able to manage what's happening in his life, and like uh, the doc said, Dr. White, flourish, right? Whatever circumstances come, there have this flexibility to adjust and to progress, right? So for me, that's positive mental health, and I don't, if you want me to talk from the theological point of view, that might be another thing, but
Yeah.
um, I think when we look at the creation story, we recognize that God created man holistically, but when sin entered, there was a disruption of his relationship with God, his relationship with his fellow man, and even a relationship with his environment, right? And so
Mhm.
if you look at wholeness, and that's what God is interested in, wholeness, it must involve those three aspects also. Because we know a person who has a sense of identity of who they are, where they're going, are less subject to anxiety and all these kinds of things. So, but we can touch on those things a little later as we continue our talk about
Mhm.
things. So that's my little thing on mental
So
health.
Yeah,
yeah,
sorry.
I'll add to that real quickly that I said I'll add to that real quickly that if you sum it up, it's really anything that impacts your functionality,
Mm,
in your life that negatively impacts your functionality, whatever that is. And to my pastor, and he's my pastor, I'll say sometimes it's religion that impacts people's functionality because they have a distorted view of who Christ is and how he manifests in their life. So it could be that, it could be job, it's just anything that takes you away from what is considered your normal functionality, however you define that.
Okay, so I know Troya. You talked about you mentioned in terms of sin, and then Dr. Marshall, you talked about from a spiritual perspective. But let me ask you, um, how prevalent are mental health issues, especially in the African American community, or at least and I know I recognize we have people from around the world, but within the context of the United States of America, what would you say would be the prevalence of mental health issues among our communities? And
Um,
that's for anybody.
I,
I will
I
speak
would say,
to
oh,
an age
go ahead,
group.
Dr. Ian.
I'll,
Go ahead,
I was
Doctor.
going to say, I'm just going to speak to one age group and let my colleagues speak to the rest. So, according to the Census Bureau, 50% of individuals between the age of 18 and 34 have a mental health disorder or a mental health condition. So, since there are four of us around the table and we all have stats, I'll just take that age group so somebody else can take another.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that in 2019, the percentage of adults in the US who had mental illness in the past year was 19.4% for blacks and 19.2% for whites. Um, so this definitely is an issue. Things really compound when you ask yourself the question, though. Okay, well they have the disorder, but what about treatment? So the really
Mm,
staggering statistic is when you say, okay, for the black community, um, how many black practitioners do they have? And that's where now you see it's alarming because, according to the American Psychiatric Association, 5% of psychologists, no, 5% of psychiatrists are black, and 3% of psychologists are black.
mhm,
And when you think about the reality that the therapeutic alliance, okay, is
mhm,
the main factor that determines whether the treatment's going to be effective. The therapeutic alliance, the therapeutic bond between clinician and patient. It's not
mhm,
the approach, it's the therapeutic bond. So that how advantageous would it be for you to have a competent practitioner that understands the cultural dynamics relevant to that patient? How helpful is that in addition to them being skilled? So we may have similar incidences or prevalence for mental illness, but when you consider the disparity in terms of the numbers of providers, that's when you really can get alarmed at the crisis facing Black Americans. And let's just get right to it. When you then review the history and see the experience that the Black community has had at the hands of medicine,
mhm.
and some of the betrayals that have taken place, you start to see
Mhm.
where there's some justification in the apprehension of the Black community to embrace treatment,
Yeah.
given some of those things, whether it's the Tuskegee Institute or whether
Right.
it is deranged diagnoses that they came up with to justify, for example, slavery.
Mm.
one really has to sympathize with the challenge that we as a community have in embracing mental illness.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I know that I do want, oh, so I
no,
do want
I
us to
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead. No, please.
No, I was doing some research on depression and suicide um, among African Americans, and one of the alarming stats that I came across, and I can't give you the exact and all this kind of stuff, was that I think it was between 18 and 35 among males, that was the highest stat when they commit suicide. So
Mm.
what is happening is that we are losing our young men to suicide when they're in their prime. The other
Yes.
ethnic groups, you know, through mental health issues, they committed suicide when they were in their 40s, 30s, I mean, 50s, 60s, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. But we are losing our primary young men when they're in the zenith of their life. And that is alarming for
Yeah,
us.
Yes, I
absolutely.
agree with
So,
you. I agree with you, Dr. Chris. And when you look at the stats as of February 2024, in the age group, like I said, I point to this age group because it's our young people we're talking about between 18 and 24. That, as of February 2023, 49.9% of individuals in the United States are either living with, and I don't say suffering, living with anxiety or depression in the age group of 18 through 24. 49.9% as of February 2023. So I agree with you. If you have a person who is at home, isolated and depressed, and have no hope and no income, and their socioeconomic factors that are contributing to their lifestyle, the result of that is someone who believes death is better than life. And so that's part of the thing that should concern us, is that our young people at an alarming rate is being impacted
mm.
by some issues around mental health.
So Troy, let me ask you, what are some, and Dr. Ann, kind of alluded to it, but tell us a little bit more pointedly. What are some of the reasons for this prevalence of mental health issues and depression and stress and potential, thoughts of suicide, etc.? What are some of the reasons for this?
Well, it's a number of factors. I mean, over the past couple of years, we can point towards the pandemic is a significant increase in African Americans seeking mental health services. I think they have the 988 number, and it's
Mhm.
alarming the rates. The 988 number is the emergency number when people are wanting mental health concerns, have being suicidal and things like that. The numbers have skyrocketed, and I think that over the past few years, and I haven't. I mean, some of the docs here can help us with that. But I think that it just seems as though we have become somewhat more anxious over the past
Mhm.
few years. I don't have anything behind that, but the more that I look at the statistics, the more I see that the increases, like these numbers, like I said, people calling the 988 number. But when we look at the African American community, we have factors as far as our social situation that are always relevant there. Um, and then I think it's kind of a culture that we still have to wrestle against that kind of states to us indirectly or directly that it's not safe to talk about your problems. It's seen
Mhm.
as a sign of weakness. It's seen. I was actually just looking at this reel the other day, and it was this guy. He was talking to his grandfather, supposed to be talking to his grandfather, and he was like, "Well, thanks." His granddad, he brought something to him. He was like, "Well, you mind if I give you a hug?" And basically, long story short, he just started cussing him out and basically telling him he's a punk. We don't play that and things like that. That's a little bit
Mm.
maybe of an extreme, but it's not far from what still exists in our culture
Mm.
when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to the being vulnerable, when it comes to not feeling like that we have to carry the burden of our stress without resorting to support. And because, like, I think what Dr. White was mentioning, the distrust that has been built within our
Mm.
communities relative to the medical models of things, the lack of available clinicians, because a lot of us will get into practice, we feel right up. It's hard to find black males, and so with just the options being that there's many times just our white counterparts to offer services, and then just the doubts and speculation about services. That combination, I think, keeps us from moving where we need to be as far as getting the support we need.
Okay. And I know Rochelle kind of, is tracking what we're saying and kind of agreeing and is also equally alarmed as at the statistics. But Dr. Marshall, I want to ask you because, from a church perspective, you're the associate pastor of a church. One of the areas that you've been assigned is in terms of spiritual care, member care, pastoral care. So I want to ask you, this resistance to counseling, to seeking help, to talking about issues, to admitting that you have issues, how real have you found it within the context of the faith community and the church?
It's real. I mean, particularly from the you know, let's talk about Seventh Day Adventist perspective, right? Where individuals are more told that you got to be perfect. You have to live up to this standard,
Yeah.
and so there's this idea, almost, and Dr. Ann alluded to it, where there's some shame to bring your brokenness to somebody and to talk about it. And the
Mm.
whole idea is that this has really impacted the church, caused the church to kind of reevaluate its position as to individuals. Because, listen, the church is not a bubble. The church is a reflection of what's happening in society. And the mental health crisis in society means that there are individuals who come to the church for solace who will have mental health issues. And we have to develop the resources to help those individuals. And so it has caused us to recognize that maybe we were contributing to it also by
Mm.
stigmatizing people's mental health illness, right? You need to
Yeah.
pray more. You don't have enough faith, right? And all of these things drive people into suffering in silence rather than being told that that God loves them, and he died, and also being able to direct them to resources that they need. And this has impacted the church because now we need to educate our leaders as to being able to identify signs of
Hmm.
mental health, and have resources available where we make referrals, right? We just can't say, okay, I can give you a Bible study and your depression will go away. That's
Yeah.
not going to happen,
Okay.
right? So it has impacted the church, and the church has to come to grips with the idea that we have to talk about difficult topics and not sweep it under the carpet and make individuals feel ashamed of what they are suffering. So these are things, it is real in the church, and if we are not careful, we will continue the the silence if we don't open ourselves
Hmm.
to have discussions and educate our people and normalize mental health challenges of others.
I want
So
to
so
piggyback
Pamela
on.
is asking. So let me just say. So Pamela is asking: are the mental health stigma in the Black church culture declining now that more people are encouraged to take care of their mental health? So go ahead, Anne. I don't know if you want Dr. Anne.
Yeah, I was going to say before I answer that question, I was just going to comment that we have to get to a place in our churches where we stop spiritualizing mental health and wellness.
Mm,
We stop sending messages to our congregants and to our church community, the religious community, that you are depressed or you're anxious or you're having some sadness or some blueness because you're not praying enough, because you're not studying
mm,
your Bible enough, because you're not having enough devotion, because you're not in contact with Jesus. I think we've done a disservice to the community, because if somebody comes to the church and says, I have a cardiac condition, nobody's talking about they're not praying enough. We're getting the oil and we are anointing and we're praying for healing and we're connecting them with a cardiologist and all of those things. But when it comes to behavioral health, the stigma, so to answer Pamela's question, no, the stigma is still very real. And people are in the shadows afraid to say, I have a problem. I need some help. Because guess what? Ooh, I can't believe Dr. Ann has a problem. Gee, I thought she was a counselor. My goodness, she can't be sad. She's an elder at the church. How could she have sadness? And so we get to the point where we spiritualize mental health as if to say it doesn't rank up there with physical health. And just the
mhm.
same way we seek services and resources for our physical health, we ought to do the same thing for our mental health and our behavioral health.
So
Yeah,
I know that.
just to answer her, I know from our church, we have gone about intentionally talking about difficult topics, talking about suicide, talking about anxieties. And it's amazing how many individuals have come up to us and say, I'm so glad that you are talking about this,
Right.
because for the first time I feel like I can talk about what I'm
Mm,
experiencing and not be judged. So it may not happen overnight, but our intention is to create a culture of safety. And I believe
mhm.
it's happening, it's changing, and people are no longer afraid to talk about it.
So with that in mind, I do want to kind of begin to move in the area of either possible solutions or recommendations, or what we can do. I mean, the reality is, everywhere we look, we're surrounded by stimuli. We're provided by surrounded by things that will eat away at us, whether it's our self-worth, our value, the comparison game, social media, and the fact that it has, etc. When you look in the news, and the depressing things that are happening, even when we look at these shootings, and people very much want to tie it to mental health,
Mm,
issues, etc. So this is something that is surrounding us, and whether we may not feel that we have as much issues as somebody else, we all know somebody who is very much struggling in that area. But Dr. White, I want to ask you, because um, in in looking at what we can do, in recognizing, and you brought up the point earlier, as far as we don't have enough mental health professionals, and especially mental health professionals that look like us, whatever us is. Um so so what are some of the things that we can do to try to address this?
Right. So first and foremost, let me caution: don't wait for the practitioner to look like you in order to go out and get help.
Say that
Mm,
Because
again.
just because they don't look
yeah.
like you doesn't mean
Amen.
they might not be able to provide you some very, very
Right.
much needed help. We're just saying, let's respect the fact that cultural congruence can be an
Mhm.
asset, but we as a people have been notorious for being able to take very little and do quite a bit with it. So the next issue that I would mention is I'm very proud to be on the board of Living Manna online church, which is part of the Northeastern Conference, and this is the
mhm.
church of Pastor Ivor Meyer and Sister Myers, Sister
Atante.
Tante Myers.
Hmm.
And what they've done is they've taken their platform and they've actually designed a mental health program.
Mm.
So they have leaned into this issue of mental health and taken it very seriously, and the community really responds really well to it. So gone are the days that, certainly in their context, this issue of mental health is sidelined. I definitely have to
Right.
commend you, Pastor Goodrich, for saying, hey, let's tackle this conversation,
Mhm.
and let's get this to the forefront. So as we walk towards solutions, especially as we see the massive shortage, it's that pressure that has led my company, the Mastermind Institute, to say we have to find a way to scale interventions,
Mm.
because just looking at the one-on-one, we're not going to do this thing. We have to take a look at what have we learned? What have we learned with patients? What interventions have we identified? And how do we scale it? How do we get it so that we can apply it in a massive way? And here's the key. If you look at a population, if we let's talk about the suicide statistics for a moment.
Mhm.
So it's 12 million people that are said to be thinking seriously about suicide. It's about 3 million people in the United States who are actively planning suicide. It's about 1.2 million that are attempting, and then it's about 48,000 that actually complete.
Mm.
Now, of course, that's devastating, but because of that, what will happen is we tend to target quite a number of resources at that acute number of 48,000. But
Yeah.
notice the numbers you're missing if we don't have serious, aggressive measures upstream from that acute
Mm.
number. And so that's why the obsession of my company is, hey, let's look at what's upstream. Believe it or not, what's the number for people that are at risk of burnout? That's 96 million.
Mm.
And the,
Mm.
the beauty of targeting more upstream is those interventions might even reduce having people get to where they get to those acute numbers in the first place.
Okay.
So there needs to be a paradigm shift where we recognize we can't wait until people are ill. We can't wait until people
Mhm.
succumb to illness.
Mhm.
We need
Mhm.
universal precautions where we recognize people are at risk until proven otherwise.
Right.
And we then need interventions. We need to help people understand, what does mental health look like, and what are activities you can do to forge your mental health, to support your mental health. What is
Mhm.
Mm.
the equivalent to going to a gym to strengthening your mental wellness? There are literally things you can do, and too often we are locked into the disease model, and we thereby miss opportunities to
Correct.
intervene and get some amazing results.
Can I
Okay.
say
So,
something, Pat?
yeah, please.
Just real quick, I just have to kind of throw this in there. With those statistics that Dr. White presented, I think it's important for us as a church to understand the context of some of those numbers. A very large percentage of those numbers, the things that when we're talking about preventative, and I like what Pastor Arvor, and Tante, what they have going on there. But the thing that many of these individuals are experiencing are issues that we haven't been very well accustomed to talk about in the church. Okay.
Right.
Mm.
High percentage of individuals who actually follow through with suicide are borderline personality disorders. Matter of fact, I think that's the number one as far as suicide. Now, I think almost half of those individuals have experienced sexual abuse and things of that nature. Okay. Then we get into eating disorders. All these things are bundled up. Sexual abuse, trauma, source of trauma. So many of our church members have been sexually abused. I find in practice that these are a lot of the things that kind of put people over, you know.
Mm.
Bisexual, high probability, almost 50% or something like that with transsexuals, of having at least an attempt in life. Okay, and bisexual is pretty strong too. So what I'm saying is that when we're, especially when we're talking about the more acute situations with suicide, and there's a lot of mental health things, even the ones that aren't as severe as this, they're involving trauma. And the thing that disappoints me is that one of the biggest, the greatest studies that's out there on trauma didn't even involve much of us, and it was
Mm.
Correct.
still showed that an overwhelming amount of individuals, even Caucasians, have experienced trauma. So I just kind of wanted to put that out to kind of qualify with Dr. White some perspective on what we're looking at.
No, I
I'm
appreciate that because I know that Rochelle earlier had talked about, in terms of these studies, how much did they actually take into account, and us as the African American community. Dr. Ann?
yeah. I want to jump in with my colleague Choya and say part of what we have to face and look at right now, especially in the post-pandemic season, is what the pandemic has done to our community in general. You talk about great levels of isolation, great, where individuals, we think Zoom and, all the other social media was a wonderful thing for us to connect with each other. But here's the thing, research does not bear that out to be true. People
Mm,
have become so accustomed to isolating from physical connection with each other that now that we're coming out on the other side of the pandemic, social isolation is a huge factor. Social
mm,
anxiety is a huge factor. So when you're talking to somebody about connecting to a social network, they're afraid. We were sheltered in place for 3 years. And
mhm,
in that time, I learned that my computer and my cell phone is my best friend. And now you're asking me to go out in the world, work among people, talk to people, connect with people, date. You're talking about individuals that are married. When you look at the staggering statistics of the divorce rate during the pandemic, 23% increase during the pandemic. And somebody will say, well, we got a chance to be with each other so we can get to know each other. Actually, what kept people married is that somebody went away and then they came back. And now all of a sudden, you're in each other's face all the time. And the issue
mhm,
is, do we even like each other? Do we
mm,
even know how to talk to each other? So you're right, Troy. There's a lot of factors that plays into suicide. I'll tell you, just this week, I am in practice talking to a, 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 a spouse who is contemplating that suggestion, oh, because the possibility of divorce is on the table. And the end result is I'd rather die than face the stigma
mm,
of a divorced person. And so we have to consider all of that as factors as we look at how is this impacting us. And I agree with my pastor and friend and colleague, Dr. Chris, and that is at Riverside, the landscape is changing. The question is it changing in other landscapes within our church community where we're trying to normalize the issue and the conversation around mental health and behavioral health and lack of health, and the fact that we have a big issue around sexual orientation and
mhm.
questioning and where people are with that. As a church, we say all are welcome. The question is, are they truly welcome?
Sure,
That's the
sure.
Yeah.
question we have to ask
Can I
ourselves.
can I piggyback?
Wow, watch
Can I
out
pick?
now.
Can I piggyback on a statement?
Yeah.
Troya Wise, living up to his name, Wise.
Oh,
So he highlighted something interesting. He mentioned, the role of the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and its association with suicide. And what's interesting about what you said, Troya, is yeah, so borderline personality disorder individuals are, I believe it's like 6 times more likely to attempt suicide than those who do not have borderline personality disorder, right? So that's an interesting finding. And of course, when we're talking about borderline personality disorder, we're talking about a disorder in which people who often have been traumatized at key moments in their development, and it's left them to where there's the resulting issue of having trouble setting boundaries, having trouble regulating their affect, their mood, and then often engaging in self-harm behavior, including suicide. But here's the thing. Here's something that is incredibly important to understand.
All right.
When the research was done according to the CDC and they looked at suicide, don't you know they found that 54% of suiciders did not have a known psychiatric diagnosis? They did not have a known psychiatric diagnosis. Now, in some situation, what that means is they were not diagnosed. So maybe they had the diagnosis, but they weren't in the care of mental health practitioners. And we'll talk about the disparity sometimes causing that. But there's a bigger point.
That's
A
deep.
psychiatric diagnosis is not a prerequisite for killing yourself.
Yeah.
This is key.
Great
This is
point.
key.
Great point.
Yeah.
A psychiatric diagnosis. You do not need a psychiatric diagnosis. And the reality is that's how instantaneous suicidality can be, which tells me it is so critical to approach this with universal precautions, because people do not automatically become labeled that they're at risk. And yet you can have a normal person who has to face an overwhelming situation, and now suddenly they can succumb to suicide. As spiritual providers, as people in county resources, it's critical to shift the paradigm to say, you know what, we really need to employ and invest in resources that help strengthen people's mental health,
Yes.
where they get the discipline of, how do I enhance my resilience? It's not, is something coming? No, something's definitely coming. But what steps are we taking? Because what I'm seeing happening is a lot of times people appear normal, and so we put them off as not needing support. And I think the results are tragic.
So let me say this as we're kind of trying to move towards, because I know that our time is starting to get away from us. But I want to try to give some practical help, some practical tools. We know that the issues are great. We know that the resources are not enough to match the need out there. And so I'm going to ask each of you, and I'm going to give you a moment to kind of think about it, in terms of what are the what are the recommendations you would give to people to help them to strengthen their mental health until such a time as they may be able to specifically talk with a counselor or a professional, etc. And Dr. Marshall, I'm going to ask you from a church perspective, as you're thinking about your answer, what can we do as churches to help to boost, foster, prevent people from, when we see people going in a particular direction, before waiting till their front wheels are off the cliff, before trying to address it. So any of you as professionals, I don't know who wants to start, but what are the top 3 recommendations that you would give to help individuals who may be struggling, who may not be able to be in a position right now to speak to a clinician?
Okay, so I'll go first.
Mhm.
I'll go first, I guess. All right. So I got 2 free resources that you can access at killingburnout.com. The first is, when I talk about suicide, one of the hallmark things that determines if a person is suicidal is purpose, a sense of purpose. So a lot of times people don't purpose, and they resource is a tool to help you identify the 3 dimensions of your. I see him freezing up, so I hope I'm coming through okay. Um, am I okay, Pastor?
No. I need you to Doc. No, you did freeze, so I need you to repeat that. You were saying, explain again what you were saying in terms of purpose.
Absolutely. So what I was saying is when a person suicides, there are two things that you'll see where a person, can just be brought to suicide. The first is that them become hopeless, which is losing a sense of purpose, and the second is feeling desperate. So the
Yes.
the first free resource that we have is a tool to help people identify the three dimensions of their purpose. They can get that at killingburnout.com. The second resource we talk about is completely free, and they just have to go to killingburnout.com/demo, and you can see us discuss the importance of the impact dimension of purpose. Completely free. You don't even have to put in your email for that resource. And it's at killingburnout.com/demo. But you get to see, man, how important is purpose and that dimension of impact. And again, completely free. Don't even have to put in your email for that. The
Okay.
third the third thing I would say is please do not underestimate the value of county mental health resources. There are so many skilled practitioners that make themselves available in that setting, so many initiatives, and people will often minimize the important role that those kind of tools can help in their mental health. Not everybody has insurance that they can, access and say, hey, connect me to a practitioner. So don't forget county resources, and this might be the most important point of all. Please, people, do not be afraid to invest in your mental health. I'll see
Hmm.
people who they come in crisis, complicated situations, and they're just going to rely on insurance. And they have the cash, just got back from a trip to Jamaica or what have you, but don't want to invest cash in finding a practitioner that would be skilled and able to help you with some very complicated situations. I want to alert you. Your mental health is worth the investment. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Kudos.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Ann.
I
Well, you're calling Pastor Chris. So I'm going to defer for a minute. Go ahead.
Okay.
No, I think one of the resources that can help individuals in a time of crisis is the church's reaction itself to the issue. Normalizing, understanding, empathizing, rather than providing this shock reaction, implying that there's something wrong with that person. I think a space of acceptance is very important before anyone um, could even help. Because if you shame them, they hold it in more. So a church, I believe, that says it's okay, and in the theological setting, helping that person to understand. And I think a lot of people don't understand this from a theological point of view. You have you are part of the fall. We all have fallen. Some people get cancer. Some people get um, mental health issues. We all have this fallen part of us, and so you are not abnormal. You are within this context of fall, and truly a really clear understanding of who God is, and I think God's grace can provide that sense of purpose and identity when their narrative is placed in the context of God's grace. A grace that says, I love you, I died for you, you are somebody, you are worthwhile. I think if the church demonstrates that kind of response, it will encourage people and give them purpose. and give them hope against all odds.
So
Okay.
I will say part of it is knowing your mind body reaction to life changes or life stressors. What do I mean? If if I don't know that if I feel sad and I have the inability to get out of bed, and the things that are normally enjoyable to me on a daily basis that are not enjoyable to me today, and I don't want to take a shower and brush my teeth and go to work and function, if I don't know that those things are a signal that something is wrong, then I do nothing about it. So the first thing I would say, education is key. Education to, if you are experiencing these symptoms, reach out to someone. I think those are some key things to say. Listen, if you are feeling down, if you're feeling blue, if you're feeling sad, if if you're experiencing confusion, if you haven't gone to work for 3 or 4 days and you have no explanation as to why you're not going to work, if you don't want to get up and take a shower, if you're eating too much, if you're sleeping too much, if you're eating too little, if you're sleeping too little, if you're running through the mania of life where you have all this energy, you just have to keep doing without slowing down. These are signals that your rhythm is off, that something is wrong, and you need to reach out to someone. We have to educate the community. We have to educate the churches. We have to educate individuals to tap into what health looks like for them, so that when things are not on the track of what would be considered normal for them, it gives them an insight that something is wrong. And often individuals don't know that. It may not be them, it might be someone in their home. It could be a child,
Mhm.
it could be a parent, a spouse. They're just not getting up. So instead of probing, we call and make the excuse, I'm sorry, Bob can't come in today, he's sick, or he's not feeling well. We don't probe what's going on with Bob, why he hasn't
Mhm.
been wanting to go to work. So the first one I would say is education. The second one, I will tap into what Dr. White said, is just knowing that it's okay to invest in your mental health and wellness. That is just as important as getting your hair done, your nails done, going to the barber, and all the
Mhm.
other things. If you're going to pay $250 to get a weave, you can pay 125 and go see a clinician. And it is okay to invest in yourself.
Yeah.
And then the church, the third one I would say is, the church has to become, for the Christian community, the church has to become a safe haven, a confidential spot for individuals to know that they can turn when there's nowhere else they can turn, that they can find a listening ear, a confidential place to de stress, debrief, and then get linked to resources to take care of their well being.
Okay. Well, thank you. Troy Wise?
Yes. Well, I want to say, it's important to surround yourself in positive environments. Um, I know this sounds lame, but I can't tell you how many people I see where they have just been cultured in an environment of somewhat like oppression. In other words, nobody thinks highly of them. No one has, and for some of you out there that's listening that can identify with this, it makes it difficult when, it sometimes it starts with the matriarchy and the patriarchy. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's a familial type of thing. Because you don't have a certain status, then you don't fit in well. And a lot of times, it's so toxic, and the individual begin to believe that, what, I don't have worth. Why? Because everyone around me, if I'm in a culture with a family to where worth means that you're this or that, or you have this job or that job,
Mhm.
then I'm not going to feel worth. So sometimes your surroundings, your family, based on your family surroundings, is sometimes how we choose our friends, and they're treating us the same way. And then we choose our
Mhm.
relationship partner. So I didn't mean to stay that long on that one. Thought stopping, I think, we use this in the profession, and basically it just means that you just stopping negative thoughts as they come. Okay, just don't entertain them. A lot of times we're just ruminating on negative. We just let it just keep going through, and and so we start we allow for some of us need to go hike away from social media, because we look at social media and we're making comparisons, and so then we get to thinking and thinking again, and and we just don't. I had a client say they're making good money, it's probably a couple 100,000. So says because we don't have the things that normal Americans have. And I
Mm,
said, can you repeat that for me? You said what? Because I want you to really think about that.
mm,
So sometimes thought stopping, the negative, and then lastly, as everybody mentioned, talk to somebody. If you can't afford a mental health professional, they have places like Open Path. A lot of us do sliding scales. 988 is a free number. I don't know if we're gonna get into resources, if that was a question. But talk to somebody. I was gonna say a pastor. You talk to, but be careful about that, because they get worn down, and a lot of times they like, please, mental health people, come help me. But talk. So that's
Pastor, can I jump in with just one more thing?
yeah, please.
This is a message to my people. Okay.
Mhm,
This is a message specifically to the Black community, and this is what we mean by if you have an ethnically congruent practitioner. What do I see when I see you? I see the importance of clarifying language. We were never slaves, we were enslaved. We
mm,
didn't have masters, we were victimized by people in a system that was morally bankrupt. It's critical to know that. It's important
mhm.
to see our situation. We were wrong.
Oh,
There was redlining. I'm sorry, am I freezing?
yeah,
Am I good
yeah.
now?
But go ahead. It's
Okay.
yes.
So it's critical to see our situations in two perspectives. Perspective one, we were victimized by redlining, by systemic oppression, and that's real. That trauma is devastating. It's tragic, and it is what it is. But am I still freezing? I look like I'm still freezing. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but
We can hear
we're
you.
working our
Testing one,
way
two,
through it.
three.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
All
we
right,
can hear you.
beautiful.
Go ahead.
So that's one lens, but the other lens is the other lens is, so one lens is massive oppression. The second lens that we have to be able to see the situation in is we can't wait for justice. We can't wait for that. We still have to create as much value in our lives as possible to move our community forward.
Mm,
I'll say that again. I'll say that
mhm,
again. We simultaneously have
mhm,
to create as much value as possible, leaning on the creator
mm,
to move the agenda of the community forward, understanding what we've been through, but still embracing the possibilities of this present time. It is critical that we see it in those two perspectives, and they both have tremendous value.
mm.
I, I,
Wow,
I want to
wow, wow.
go. I want
that's
to go
good.
back
Go
to
ahead.
where we started, and that is, I think, a very powerful point that was made that I want to repeat is, do not wait for someone to look like me or you in order to
Hmm.
access resources and access services. Trained clinician comes in all color, size, and shape. It's better to access a clinician than to access none. The second point I want to make is reach out to your county health department. I heard that it's bear repeating. Where you can't access private payer, you can go to your county public health department and seek services and seek resources and talk to someone who can help you align resources and address your needs. Sometimes we don't consider that. We don't. And
Hmm.
the other point is, sometimes we have a great message, but we're not the best messenger. So find the best messenger for the client that comes to you. Sometimes I may not be that messenger, but Dr. Chris might be a better messenger, or Troya might be a better messenger. We might have the message, but we might not be the messenger. And so we don't want to put people through therapeutic trauma if we're not the right messenger to address their needs. We have to recognize that that's real, because then the community doesn't trust us and they do not want to connect in a place where they really need help.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is, and kind of trying to recap a little bit, some of the real tangible tools, solutions, recommendations from these experts to help us is number one: don't wait to talk to somebody. Don't wait till somebody looks like you, is from your background, is from your religion or experience. Um, don't wait until that happens, but go ahead, be proactive, and talk to somebody. Also, there was a resource, killingburnout.com, in which you can find resources there, and then killingburnout.com/demo. Um, Take advantage of the county resources that are available, your health department, etc. Be willing to invest in your mental health the same way that you invest in a gym, the same way that you may invest in a hobby or leisure, etc. The same way that you may invest in how you dress, or how the clothes you wear, etc., or the food, the type of food, the quality of food that you eat. Invest in your mental health the same way. Also, uh, even within our churches, even as individuals, as we interact with individuals, and as individuals reveal to us the struggles that they have, our response and our reaction as individuals who are filled with grace ourselves, the grace that we've received from God, that we extend that same grace to others in terms of their situation. Making sure that we recognize that we all have issues in some way, shape, or form. Theologically, because of the fall, and just the fact that we are just sinful human beings. You may see my issue, um, uh, out there, up in front of people, because if I have a broken leg, you can see that I have a broken leg. But somebody with a broken spirit, you may not necessarily see that, but we all in some way are broken. Also, making sure that we allow our churches to be a safe, confidential environment, which begins with us. We need to treat people and the things that they say or the things that may do in a confidential way. Also, putting ourselves in a positive environment. If our houses, or if our homes, or where we are, or our offices, etc. My office, I have no windows in my office, so every now and then I have to get up, go out where I can see, or go out into the fresh air, etc. But putting yourself in a positive environment, or stop negative thoughts when they come, instead of dwelling on them, instead of listening to depressing music or music that reinforces how I feel. Do something else that will stop that thought, to be able to have a positive thought. Uh, did I recap well? I mean, missing something?
Absolutely. I mean, no,
Great
that was
Okay.
job.
beautiful. That was beautiful.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
praise
I
God.
just want to
Listen,
echo. I just want to
go ahead.
echo the sentiment. I just want to echo the sentiment, just because I was freezing up. I want to make sure it's stated
Mhm.
clearly. As a Black community, please recognize ours is a legacy of triumph. Ours is a legacy of triumph. We have overcome and overcome and overcome, and that's our true legacy. We overcome.
Yeah. So I guess that would also, that called reframe our perspective, reframe our history, rather than seeing ourselves as being, um, oppressed and etc. Think about what we did to survive, and how we have overcome our situations. So thank you for that.
Pastor, that is such a critical tool that is available to us. We call it the cognitive reframe.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ability to take something, to take a situation and shift the perspective, especially to a perspective that's more empowering. That is, I'm glad you used that frame because that's exactly what it is. It's a cognitive reframe, and we
Hmm.
need to reframe things in ways where we emerge empowered rather than
Amen.
frames that take power away from us.
Yes.
Oh wow, wow.
Well said.
Listen,
Well said.
I want to thank you all so much. Dr. Ann, Choya Wise, Dr. Ricardo White, Dr. Christopher Marshall. I want to thank you so much for your expertise, for your experience, for your wisdom, for the resources that you've helped to provide. I know that we could go on for another 2 or 3 hours because we're only just scratching the surface. But even if the message that we leave from here is to talk to somebody,
Hmm.
is to reach out and get help, don't wait. Don't wait till your two front wheels are off the cliff. But if you see that you're heading in a particular direction, go and seek help. If that's the only thing that you get from this, then praise the Lord, because that will be a tremendous start as we try to stem this tide of what the devil has been doing in attacking our mental health. And so we want to take it back. We want to reframe. We want to reclaim our mental health. And we find our strength in our mental health in the grace of Jesus Christ, understanding our struggles and our issues, and understanding that He loves us. And there's nothing that we can do that separates us from the love of God.
Amen.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, panelists, for being with us. I greatly appreciate the time that you spent. And we'll be right back after this. So I want to thank each and every one of you, those of you who have contributed, those of you who put your comments in the chat, etc. For those of you who have shared this, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to let you know that we meet every month, and we have another special episode next month. In fact, next month is our camp meeting edition, the Public Square camp meeting edition. We will be meeting on June the 15th at a new time from 3 to 5 p.m. And we're going to be talking about gender identity and the church. You don't want to miss that show, Gender Identity and the Church. We're going to talk about this issue of what we can do as a church to provide that safe environment, to provide that caring environment, to provide that environment where we can adequately minister to individuals um, who are going through their own journey with their gender identity. And so, again, I want to thank you for joining us. Please share this. Subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our program, share the link, share this resource with somebody, and I will see you again next month in the public square.